Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast for Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin. We've got a special guest with us today. It's Brett Greenberg, our recruiting guru at Bama 247. Brett, we're recording this on Wednesday morning. It's going to go out on Thursday. Pretty special holiday this week, right? Halloween. What was your favorite Halloween costume growing up?
So I might bore some people, but I wasn't a huge Halloween guy, and people that know me kind of know that I wasn't the greatest guy at, planning, getting dressed up. I was a Hershey Kiss when I was 2 years old. So that's a funny picture that my parents like to bring up every weekend. But it's tough. I think I'm going to have to go with the Brave jersey I wore during Halloween when the Braves beat the Astros to win the World Series. Maybe I'll just go with that one, memory-wise. If
not a big costume guy, then what was your favorite candy? Like, what was the one thing that you looked forward to every year?
It's got to be probably Reese's when I was younger. Then as I grew up, it went to kind of just a plain Hershey's bar, which I know is pretty boring, but I don't think you can get much better with the Hershey's bar. What about you?
Dude, there's something nice about just like a general just bar of chocolate. Like sometimes it's just really good. No, when we were growing up, we would go over to my aunt's house who lived in one of those like neighborhoods with sidewalks, and just it was really easy to go and like trick or treat. And like 4 houses down from her was always this house that gave out the mass, like the big candy, right? Like the king size Crunch Bar, right. The king size like Reese's Cups. And so like I always look for, I'm same as you. I always look forward to the Reese's Cups because then you'd take the big ones and you'd put them in the freezer.
Oh yeah.
And they would last for a long time. So like my dad taught me that trick because he loved the big Snickers bar. And so like if I could get away with 2, I would try to get him a Snickers bar and then we would both put them in the freezer. So yeah, I was always a big fan of just that house because everything was just monster sized.
Absolutely. So, did you take one when the bowl said take one growing up? If there was a bowl sitting outside, did you ever have that growing up? Like if someone wasn't home and they had like to take one from the bowl outside, did you take one, or were you dumping it all in your bag?
Questioning my moral decision making here. I think I always took 2. I was always like, I like that one and that one. So, but I did see kids, they take like a whole handful. Yeah. I never saw the kid that dumped the entire thing in their bag, but I always saw kids that take like a handful when it's like, just take one. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
Which, you see kids take a handful and it's like, 2's not that bad, right?
Right. Like, yeah. It's all relative.
Yeah. I'm not the worst here. I'm not the worst. We're going to talk recruiting on today's podcast. And there's a lot of big things that have been happening when it comes to Alabama recruiting. That's why we got Brett here. He's going to break it all down for us. There have been a handful of commitments, pretty big flip, pretty important flip. And then also a junior college commitment. We'll touch on that in a minute. There have been 3 home games. I say this month. I know the Georgia game was late September, but there have been 3 home games, which means a lot of visitors have been on campus in Tuscaloosa. We're going to break down some of the big takeaways Brett has from some of those visits. Also going to take a look at maybe the target list that's beginning to form for 2026. But I wanted to start, Brett, with Alabama's 2025 recruiting class. Nothing major, I think, has changed between the last time we talked and now, but they are now the number 1 ranked 2025 recruiting class ahead of Ohio State, Georgia, and LSU. 23 kids in this class. It seems like it was more the product of 24/7 releasing their most recent 2025 prospect list, right? Where they were able to kind of re-rank some of these guys. And when you look at Alabama's class, they've got 5 5-star players, all 5 of those guys within the top 25 of the 2025 class. What can you say about, now Alabama having the number 1 ranked recruiting class? That's got to be pretty good for, Courtney Morgan and the scouting and recruiting department, but also, Kalen DeBoer and the coaching staff. I mean, clearly they've been putting in work to find a lot of these guys, and you'd rather be number 1 than not, right? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Right off the bat, it's nice to be number 1. You got to close that out in the last month to 5 weeks, of course. But again, it's a continued testament to what every time I call on here, what they're doing and continuing to keep guys in the fold. And like you said, it's that recent jump in the top 247 rankings of a couple guys from the scouting department who do an excellent job of kind of scouring tape across the country of all these top prospects. And, you got like Keelan Russell, who, we talk about all the time on here, and he continues to impress for Duncanville. He jumped to the number 3 overall player in the country. There's 3 quarterbacks in the top 3, so it kind of shows you the competition level there. Michael Carroll, guy at IMG that I think a lot of Alabama fans are going to like fairly quickly in college. Everything you hear from these guys, it's like, yeah, he has what it takes to be, maybe Andrew Ivins was calling him a forklift in the middle. I think that can maybe jump on, and maybe Cody can get up on that. I think he kind of, likes those type of guys. He jumped 100 spots. A guy like Jackson Lloyd jumped a bunch of spots. So it's just continues to be a very, very, very good class, and they're continuing to be back in Tuscaloosa, which again is always good things. You talk to a lot of them, continue to be, hey, I'm locked in, and again, you got to continue to hold them, but you kind of laugh at it. It's, you lose to Vanderbilt, you lose to Tennessee, and it's kind of, the sky is falling on our message boards. I know we've seen it on Twitter, and these older people that are kind of done with this program, done with the board, and you talk to these 16, 17, 18-year-olds and like, hey, this happens. Like you can lose a game, and it's refreshing to see see their perspective and say, hey, I'm not letting 1-2 losses affect me and my decision making. And I think that kind of speaks to what this staff has continued to do, and what these current players have continued to reach out, especially a guy like Ryan Williams, kind of just, hey, we're going to continue to do what we're doing, and hey, we may have another loss, but it's okay. And it's his first year. Things are going to continue to go on.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because you look at some other programs around the country, and when losses start to stack up, right? And 2 losses isn't exactly a massive stack of losses, but it's different, right? First time Alabama has lost 2 games before November since 2007. Brett, you were probably still a Hershey Kiss for Halloween way back then. But you look at Florida, for example, right? The losses kind of piled up early, and you saw quite a handful of decommitments there, right? You see Auburn struggling, right? And a handful of those guys are, I don't want to say they've decommitted, because they're still landing some pretty good recruits, but some of those guys are looking elsewhere, including a couple that came to Tuscaloosa not too long ago. We'll touch on those guys here in just a minute. There really hasn't been a lot of that with Alabama. Just, I know you touched on it a little bit there, but what exactly are you hearing from these guys, after a loss to Vanderbilt, after a loss to Tennessee? One of those I think may have been expected at the beginning of the season, the Tennessee loss. The Vanderbilt loss was kind of a stunner and sent shockwaves all across college football. Just what are you maybe hearing from some of these guys? Like, what are they hearing from coaches? What are they hearing from guys like Ryan Williams, maybe Jalen Mbakwe, some of the other guys that are keeping in contact, just in terms of, hey, like, stay confident, we're doing what we're doing? Because some of these guys may be taking visits elsewhere, but there really hasn't been a lot of decommitments from Alabama's class. Just that's, what have you heard from those guys?
Yeah, I think it's a few different things. I think it's the continuing of Alabama, just the name Alabama continuing to hold that weight and the standard, and knowing that if you're going to go there, you're going to get developed and you're going to go to the NFL. That's what a lot of guys are telling me. And then a big thing is how close this class is. I mean, like you said, they got in the summer was that, cold summer branding at the 14 commitments. So it's been many months that these guys have been in the fold together. Many times they've had opportunities to be back in Tuscaloosa together, whether it's for the Champions Cookout in late July, the 3-4 home games, like you mentioned at the top of the show. And a lot of these coaches continue to hit on these guys. You talk to a guy like Caleb Cunningham and, multiple other guys. It's like, hey, I feel like I'm not even committed the way these guys continue to reach out to me. Marshall Pritchett's talking about, hey, I flipped, and these guys are reaching out to me in the class saying, hey, welcome to the class. You got a guy like Caleb Edwards, who's at the same position as Marshall Pritchett, and, maybe thought he was the only guy in the class, but, Brandon Huffman talks to him, hey, Alabama walked me through the entire thing, explain how we're both going to be utilized and things like that. So Alabama staff is being open, honest, genuine, and those are the same kind of descriptors that have been used since they came in January. So again, it's, and I think it's Alabama and these guys, these recruits just having maybe a better perspective than some of the longer Alabama fans that haven't really lost 2 games before October, like you said, in, however many years. So again, I think it's just continuing to have trust, and a big part of it is too, and I know Alabama lost guys to the transfer portal, so you got to play freshmen, but they're continuing to play. They're continuing to get opportunities in big spots. They're continuing to produce. And if you're a guy that's a 5-star, among the 5 5-stars in this class, say, hey, why can't that be me next year, and continue to play at a school that has that standard still?
Last question on this 2025 class, sitting at 23 kids right now. I know we're going to get into some of the visitors that have been in Tuscaloosa over the last month, but how big do you expect this class to be by the time signing day arrives? We're only 5 weeks out.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's 5 weeks, but I would say probably, looking at this targets list, that's, kind of still changing. We saw it kind of blow up at the beginning of September with a lot of these guys building a lot of tape and getting offers, kind of died down a little bit. I expect maybe, 2 to 4 more guys. You're looking at a 27-person class, and then, you look at what Kalen DeBoer has been very active in the transfer portal wherever he has been, whether that's Washington. He had to be at Alabama. That you would think that continues to be the case this time around as well. So I think you add 2 to 4 more, maybe at the high school ranks, and then you kind of see where you go from there and see who you lose after the season or next week or an hour from now, who decides to go in the transfer portal. You never know. But yeah, I see it, not many more targets remaining. It's number one class with 23 commitments for a reason.
2 added commitments in the month of October for Alabama. Figured we could run through both of those guys right here. 4-star tight end from Georgia, Marshall Pritchett, guy that you mentioned, flipped from North Carolina. Also, I believe his dad went to Notre Dame. Kind of cool. Not quite legacy, but clearly the athletic traits are going to be there. The other, Devonte Henry, 3-star defensive lineman out of junior college. Both those guys committed about a week apart from each other. Wanted to start with Marshall Pritchett. You had mentioned that, him and Caleb Edwards, both the 2 tight ends in this class. The coaching staff have been very transparent about, hey, we want 2 tight ends in this class. This is what we're going to do. I'm sure that they've been watching a lot of Alabama football on Saturdays. They've seen a lot of 12 personnel, right? CJ Dupree, Robbie Utes have been on the field a lot together. Josh Cuevas has made his mark, I think, over the last few weeks or so, just kind of as that third tight end / receiving threat. What more can you tell us about Marshall Pritchett? Can you kind of take us behind the flip a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going to start with where you kind of just started right there. Like he talked about him watching Alabama's offense, especially he was in town for the Georgia game, seeing CJ Dupree get, I believe it was, or the tight ends combined for 8 or 9 catches that game. He saw that they're being used, and he talked about what the message was from Brian Ellis, the whole, like, we want to use a tight end, and we maybe not necessarily have the guys in the room right now, and maybe we saw that earlier this year when you bring in a guy like Josh Cuevas. It says, hey, maybe we don't have exactly what we need. We see the way they're using CJ Dupree, and if you're an Alabama fan, you like guys like Caleb Edwards and Marshall Pritchett coming in. Marshall Pritchett is a guy that's 6'5", 220, has all the makings to be 240, 245, plays for an extremely talented program in Raven Gap, Georgia, plays kind of a national schedule and continues to exceed. That was a big selling point for the scouting department to kind of bump him in the rankings to the top 247 to number 15 tight end. But kind of into the recruitment wise, it's kind of funny. I joke with him. He visited in March. I had a graphic made in April, kind of just like, this kid's going to Alabama, just from his mindset, the way he was talking about it. I mean, he talked about how Brian Ellis reminded him of his father, and it's the gold standard college football. He said, I eat, sleep, and breathe college football. It's what all my dad played. His dad was the leading tackler on the Notre Dame national championship team in 1988. His older brother's at Georgia Tech. So this kid kind of just eats, sleeps, breathes football. And not a kid that, he's open about it. His father talked about it too. They did not want to flip, obviously some circumstances in North Carolina, kind of some uncertainty, going on, some losses, and, Alabama kind of made it impossible for him to say no the way they continued to recruit him kind of just nonstop. Brian Ellis went and visited him. Kalen DeBoer went and visited him. He was up for an official visit, came back for the Georgia game, said it kind of wrote itself there. And then the commitment was kind of made for him, is what he said. And I know this was very clearly a top target from the beginning. And I think this guy is going to offer almost maybe immediate playing time just with his frame, his mindset, his ability to go and make plays. You kind of talk to the scouting department's kind of similar to Caleb Odom in the way they're used in high school, but the way I've been told and kind of continue to tell, like, hey, this guy's going to be a tight end, and we want to have a Ryan Williams, a Caleb Odom, and a Marshall Pritchett on the field, and maybe a Caleb Edwards blocking in line. So, I mean, everything you hear about this kid and everything you talk to his parents, his him, his coach, it's just an all-around great kid, and I think a guy that's going to, compete and also make other people work very hard in that tight end room.
6'5", 211 with room to grow into that 240, 250 range. Got to think Alabama coaches are licking their chops to get that guy in the weight room. The other commitment, Devonte Henry, 3-star defensive lineman from junior college. He's the second junior college defensive lineman that they've got, along with Steve Mbamoa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. We've
From
been
Canada.
talking about Steve from Canada. We've been talking about Steve for the better part of a year now with the whole reclass thing, and now he's back part of their class. So they got two guys there in addition to London Simmons. This seems like, I guess when you look at, those three defensive linemen, and then you kind of take a peek at Alabama's current defensive line room, right? You've got a guy like Tim Smith, who exhausting eligibility this year. You've got guys like Tim Keenan and LT Overton, who are probably going to head to the NFL after this year, or at least that's going to be on their radar. I think Overton maybe a little bit more than Keenan, but Keenan has that ability after this year as well. Yeah. Jamarian Latham's going to be exhausting eligibility. They kind of need some defensive linemen in this class. I know that could also be a portal position that they go after here in the next couple months or so, but what can you tell us about Devonte Henry? What's Alabama getting in this guy? I mean, clearly he's playing JUCO ball, so maybe not quite SEC speed that he's familiar with, but is a guy that maybe a little bit more mature, I suppose, is the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you kind of started there perfectly. Like, you need defensive linemen. There's no question about it at Alabama in this class. Again, they've got two JUCO guys. They've got London Simmons, but you're still going after this big fish in Justice Terry. Again, all signs point to Georgia there. But yeah, there's no question about it. D-line has continued to be not a question mark, but more so a need. You just got to get more guys. And Devonte Henry is certainly a nice addition. Like you said, maybe more mature. He's a guy that, was previously committed to Michigan, when Courtney Morgan was actually there, flipped to Oklahoma, kind of didn't really work out there, played a season there. And then now has been at Cerritos College out in Los Angeles, back home for the past 2 seasons, and has played pretty well, 6'4", 220, kind of like him at that bandit position. And, he talked to his coach, and he talks about, off the field, which I think is a big thing, is, he's a dad. He's got a 2-year-old daughter. He works, in the middle of the night, then he comes to practice, and he said no one works harder than him. He's the leader of this team. So I think bringing that mature attitude to a room, like you said, that is going to possibly, or is going to lose a lot of veteran leadership, is good to bring in, with along with the other younger guys coming in, and, the sophomores and things like that. But again, I think you add a pretty talented kid, and he kind of, to be honest, kind of flew under the radar, was committed to Mississippi State, showed up for Alabama on an official visit. You start hearing, hey, who is this kid? What's going on here? Does he have an offer? Commits, flips, and then commits. And that's pretty much been it. Still trying to get in touch with him, just to kind of just pick his brain, get to Alabama fans to know him a little bit better. But there's a great write-up with his head coach, who was pretty proud of him, which I really enjoyed writing up.
This guy's been through a lot, and you hit on it, right? Committed to Michigan, committed and signed with Oklahoma. Then he hit the portal, and then he was committed to Mississippi State, and now Alabama. Seems like a little bit of a Courtney Morgan special, assuming that he sticks with the Tide. Is there worry with 5 weeks to go that maybe he could bounce around again, or does this seem pretty rock solid?
It seems pretty rock solid. And again, like, just recruiting with the way this fluid, like, there could be everything I said today could be wrong by the time Cody publishes this, but I'm hoping not. I am hoping not. But no, it doesn't seem to be anywhere. His coach said, he's excited, like the opportunity to go see Alabama on a game day and see all these players and get that full official visit. He's like, this is my best opportunity to get to the league, take care of my daughter, take care of, my girlfriend, my wife, and all that stuff. So I don't think there's anything there. And, kind of sticking with the D line, London Simmons, he's a guy that Alabama really, really loves. Alabama fans are really going to love. He loves Alabama, has been to every home game. It's going to be back, was talking to his coach. There's no wavering there. Hoping to, maybe get him into the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game along with a lot of other commits, which would be good to see for the scouting department. But, again, it seems like a lot of these guys are pretty locked in.
Wanted to transition now to some of the official visits, right? Alabama, over the last 5 games, has had 3 home games. That means a lot of official visitors, a lot of guys getting on campus for official visits. The Georgia game, the South Carolina game, the Mizzou game, you've done a really good job of just, here's the running list of visitors, here's guys and names that you need to know, doing really good stuff, following up, just, both getting their perspective on the actual win or loss itself, but then also like, hey, how was the visit? How was the process? What do you think of the staff? This, that, and the next. What were some of your big takeaways from the 3 home games over this 5-game stretch? Like, what were some of the big, visitors who were on campus? Who are the big names that Alabama fans maybe need to know? You mentioned, another 2, 4, maybe 5 kids that are going to join this class, but also looking ahead a little bit to 2026, just kind of spill your brain for us, man. Like, what did you learn over these last 3 home games?
Yeah, I mean, first off, some of these kids that went to this Georgia game, it was their first ever SEC game or their first ever Alabama game, and I'm just like, how did
way to set the bar way too high?
Right. I mean, these kids, like some of them, like I almost fainted. I did this. It was you heard the Georgia fans barking, and then Alabama came back, and things like that. I mean, hearing the stories from the Alabama Georgia game, and having been an Alabama alum, and having been to a game versus Georgia in Tuscaloosa, it's like. It was just kind of you smiling, hearing about it. It's like these kids are about to start their college careers and they're going to be on the field. So that was very cool. Obviously, that Georgia game, that outcome was pretty much best case scenario. Coming out of the weekend, you hear from a couple sources, it's like you could have asked for a better thing. I don't know how anybody wouldn't want to commit to us. Then, of course, you follow it up with the loss to Vanderbilt. Which, again, you hit on it. It's, there's no decommitment. So again, they're continuing to do a really good job. But again, with these visits, it's like you said, it's been kind of a who's who, but each guy seems to be getting the attention they deserve, so to speak. You talk about, all these commitments coming in. They're continuing to sit down with Kalen DeBoer and talking about their process and how's your senior year. And, obviously their relationships are a little bit more established than targets wise. But again, a lot of these commitments coming in, a lot of these new targets that have emerged have stopped by, and whether they've continued to be recruited by Alabama or have shown interest in Alabama, they continue to say, hey, this staff, it's kind of, all in, all hands on deck. Everybody knows my name. Hey, it's my first time here, and, the janitor knows my name, and I've got this nameplate, and my little sister has this, and I'm taking care of that. It's just kind of an all hands-on approach, and that's what Kalen DeBoer talked about, I think, in his opening press conference or SEC Media Days or whatever it was, and it's continued to hold true. But like you said, and we talked about it, there's a couple more targets over the weekend. Missouri's kind of another very loaded roster for a big shutout win. Again, a lot of Alabama commits: Luke Metz, London Simmons, Mal Waldrop, Justin Hill popped up. Those guys are completely locked in. They're Bama through and through, which you continue to like, and getting them back on campus is a good thing. And there's 2 official visitors, both Auburn commits, Anquan Fagans, who I think some of the older Alabama fans may remember. His older brother was committed, played at Alabama, and then ended up transferring to USC. He's committed to Auburn, has been committed to Auburn since late July. He actually visited for the Champions Cookout, then committed to Auburn a day later. All signs point to Auburn signing this kid, in the next month, 5 weeks, or in February, whenever he chooses to sign. But getting on campus, you heard it was a good trip. It was a good opportunity, but I don't think it was more of what Alabama did wrong. I think it's Auburn kind of having a stranglehold on that recruitment. Another guy is Donovan Starr, who's emerged recently. Alabama went out and saw him, the 4-star cornerback out in Brentwood, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, offered him. He came and visited for an official visit. Alabama seems to be a team to watch. He continues to like Auburn. Auburn feels pretty good about it. It's, talking with people closer to that program. Another team to watch is Vanderbilt. He was actually in Nashville for that Alabama game. So, Vanderbilt, you see Vanderbilt kind of getting in, knocking on some doors, opening some doors, and a lot of these, couple SEC commits, couple, it works wonders when you beat a team like Alabama and you have the season what you have. I don't want to just leave it to Alabama what your guy Diego Pavia has done, which all credit to you. I know we're getting sidetracked, but I mean, you completely put me on to him. Cody watches film in the offseason, I'll tell you that. But yeah, he's a guy that I think Alabama really, really, really likes. And, you got a guy like Dijon Lee and Chuck McDonald at the cornerback position. But again, they like to add him. And obviously safety position is kind of a need as well. Anquan Fagans is that safety. Derek Smith is that safety as well. They're both committed to Auburn. Derek Smith, obviously former Alabama commit, but, the hunt for safety is still on. And, new names could emerge, but, kind of for that full list of targets and things like that, go to Bama 247, just put out a bye-week big board, 2.0 for the second bye-week offensive edition. Not so many targets on that list, which is a good thing if you're an Alabama fan, just kind of by the commits. And defense will be released tomorrow with a little bit more targets on there.
It seems like, of the 2, 4, 5 kids that might join this 2025 class or round out this 2025 class, defensive minded, right? Maybe another defensive lineman here and there. I know you mentioned they're still after Justice Terry, maybe some guys in the secondary, because there's the potential that they could lose some pretty key experienced guys like Malachi Moore. We'll see what happens with Devonta Smith, but just could get a little thin up there as well. And, maybe just kind of fill in some gaps here and there. Who are some other names that maybe kind of jumped out at you over the last few home games that either made visits or have really been kind of talking pretty heavily with Iowa? Is it just kind of the big fish that are still out there, or who are some other guys we need to know?
Yeah, it's most of the guys I just named. Another guy is Tim Griffin, a D lineman out of Alcovey, Georgia. Went to Alabama for the Georgia game, returned for another game, I believe. Kind of talked about setting up official visits, still kind of working that. That's a D lineman. I know Alabama fans, a lot of worry about defensive line, and rightfully so in some cases. But that's kind of what I named, kind of where we're at right now as far as that goes, just targets wise. And again, new names could emerge, and I'm continuing to dig and see what's left. But again, like Cody talked about, we talked about it's number one class. It's 23 commits. It's a pretty good one from top to bottom.
Wanted to bring up the couple of Auburn guys that came to visit. Not so much to maybe talk about them, because I kind of, like you said, it seems like Auburn's in pretty good position with those guys. And we say all the time, right? The kids that are committed to Alabama that go and take visits elsewhere, it's like, hey man, like, take your visits. You usually only get to go through this process once. And if teams are going to pay to wine and dine you, take advantage of it, right? So a couple Auburn commits, Fagans and Starr, seems like they're doing that, right? But, obviously getting wined and dined by Alabama. There were 3 Alabama commitments who took visits elsewhere this past weekend. You made mention of that in the running list of visitors ahead of the Missouri game last weekend. That's 5-star wide receiver Caleb Cunningham, went to go see Ole Miss. 4-star running back Anthony Rogers went to go see Ohio State. And then this is a 2026 commit, 4-star cornerback Dorian Barney. I believe he's Alabama's only 2026 commit currently. He went to go check out Texas A&M. Assuming Alabama's still pretty rock solid with these guys, especially the couple of 2025 guys with Caleb Cunningham and Anthony Rogers.
Yeah, I mean, I put a little note in the big board about Cunningham, but he continues to say the right things every time, I connect with him. Hey, I'm committed to Alabama. Jamarcus Shepard, Kalen DeBoer, Keelan Russell, they're continuing to reach out to me. They're continuing a good job. He's a prime example of a guy that feels like he's uncommitted in the way they're recruiting him, which I think is very encouraging to hear if you're an Alabama fan. Now, I will say over the last couple of days, it's, Ole Miss maybe is picking up a little bit more buzz than, they've always had that little bit of buzz. I've talked about it on the show. I've talked about it in multiple stories. These Mississippi kids somehow, some way, sometimes kind of find their way staying in state, no matter what. It's just kind of one of those things. I will say a guy like A.K. Deere, who's committed, number 2 running back, nothing to worry about there. Continue to check on him. He's going to be a part of this class. But as far as Caleb Cunningham goes, yeah, like you said, went back to Ole Miss. That was his second visit. Still has an official visit to be taken, whether he wants to do that or not. But that, I think, is noteworthy. Told Rebels 247, David Johnson, that that December decision may be pushed back to February. He's a kid that wants to play basketball and also maybe wanting to push it back, which, right off the bat, I don't think it's not a great sign if you're an Alabama fan. And but again, you continue to talk with people. Alabama seems very, very confident in what they have to offer and how long they've had them committed. But again, Caleb will kind of continue to say all the right things to everybody. And we're going to continue to track that one. To be completely honest, I'm going to be monitoring that one a little bit more closely towards we get this, as we get closer to the winter months, and seeing if he decides to sign in December or February. But yeah, as far as he goes, I ultimately think he's going to end up in the class, but we'll see. And then a guy like Anthony Rogers, it's continued to be kind of I wouldn't say weird recruitment. I think weird in the sense that he doesn't really speak much. I went out and visited him, traveled to Central Phoenix City from Atlanta to go watch his game, watch him in person for the first time, him go against, fellow Alabama commit Mal Waldrop. Spoke with his mother, spoke with him after the game for a little bit. Took an official visit to Georgia, took an official visit to Ohio State. Those are two teams that have continued to stay on him for a very, very long time. Those are two schools that he had mentioned months ago to myself when I last saw him, that, hey, I'm going to go visit here. I may take official visits here. It's a little bit concerning having not taken that Alabama official visit in the summer, but that will be taken most likely for the Mercer weekend, if not the Iron Bowl. I was talking with his mother, made me want to get to that Mercer weekend because it kind of a little bit less going on compared to an Iron Bowl. You get to maybe sit down with the coaches for a little bit longer. But again, this is a guy that is the lone holdover commit from the Nick Saban era. Hey, me and Gillespie are very close. I didn't have a reason to decommit. I love everybody here. But again, you can't really ignore the continued interest in Georgia and Ohio State. They really, really, really like him. It is worth note, those guys, both those programs already have two running backs in the class without Rodgers. Rodgers obviously is the second in Alabama with Deere. But his ability that he's shown on film and in person to be a receiver, I think has been really appealing to other programs, and I think super appealing to Alabama as well. It's one that Alabama want to keep in the fold. And I just confirmed with his mother, actually this morning that he's still going to be visiting November. Of course, he'll be visiting, and he's looking forward to that. So we're going to go from there.
And I think the other thing too to keep an eye on, maybe from Anthony Rodgers' perspective, just running back at all these different programs a little bit fluid, I suppose. Yeah. Right? There might be more spots available at Georgia and Ohio State in the coming years. Whereas, like, if you look at Alabama, like, we'll see what Jam Miller ultimately decides. Yeah. But Justice Haynes is in the fold for at least another year, right? Richard Young, for so far as we can tell, probably going to be sticking around. And then you've also got Kevin Riley and Dan Mountain still hanging out on the roster, right? So that's just, he may be looking for what's the faster way to opportunity at one of these bigger schools. And if that happens to not be Alabama, that could be one, bad because you don't want to lose a talented recruit, but also good because, like, you got a lot of dudes in the room, right? So that's an interesting situation there, I think, to consider as this kid continues to take some of his visits. Number 1 ranked 2025 recruiting class, 2026 going to be on deck soon, very soon. But that's really all we had for today, guys. Appreciate Brett coming on and sharing his recruiting expertise. We'll be back on Sunday. We're going to bring on Isaac Trotter, national college basketball writer, talk some Tide hoops before they begin their season next Monday. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 24/7 Sports. You need a subscription to get all of Brett's great recruiting insight. And with signing day 5 weeks away, you're going to want to take advantage of that deal. I put a link to it in the show notes. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.
See you guys.